In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and neon lights painted the streets at night, there stood a small but luxurious boutique named Ebony Luxe. The store was unlike any other in the area. Its polished black marble floors gleamed under soft golden lights, and its shelves were lined with designer watches, diamond-studded jewelry, and rare leather goods that only the wealthy could afford. It wasn't just a shop. It was an experience, a statement of elegance and exclusivity. The man behind this masterpiece was Marcus Kane, tall, sharply dressed, and always carrying himself with quiet confidence. Marcus was a mystery to everyone who crossed his path. He rarely spoke about his past, and when asked, he would simply smile and say, "I'm just a businessman trying to make a living." What no one knew, what Marcus worked tirelessly to keep hidden, was that he wasn't always the refined owner of Ebony Luxe. Once upon a time, Marcus had been someone else entirely, a name whispered in fear across the criminal underworld, a deadly assassin whose skills were unmatched. But those days were supposed to be over, or so he thought. Marcus had built Ebony Luxe from scratch, pouring every ounce of his energy into creating something beautiful. For years he lived peacefully, serving high-profile clients and earning respect as a successful entrepreneur. His store became a symbol of success for the Black community, in a neighborhood still struggling with deep-rooted racism. Yet, despite his achievements, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked around every corner. He avoided trouble, kept his head down, and hoped his past would stay buried forever. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. One chilly evening, as Marcus locked up the store after a long day, he noticed a group of young men loitering outside. They wore dark hoodies, their faces obscured by masks, and their eyes glinted with malice. At first, Marcus assumed they were just passing through, but then one of them stepped forward, blocking his way. "Hey, rich boy," the leader sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can open your fancy little shop in our neighborhood and not pay respects?" Marcus froze, his hand tightening around the keys in his pocket. He recognized the tone immediately. It was the same kind of hate-filled rhetoric he'd heard countless times before. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were part of a notorious racist gang that terrorized minority-owned businesses in the area. Their reputation preceded them: vandalism, theft, intimidation. And now, they had set their sights on Ebony Luxe. The leader smirked, pulling out a knife and twirling it casually between his fingers. "We don't like outsiders here," he continued, taking another step closer, "especially ones who think they're better than us." Behind him, the rest of the gang chuckled, emboldened by their numbers. Marcus felt his stomach churn, but he forced himself to remain calm. Years of training kicked in, whispering reminders to assess the situation carefully. How many of them were armed? Where were the exits? Could he take them all down if it came to that? But Marcus hesitated, not out of fear, but out of restraint. If he fought back, he risked exposing his true identity. The last thing he wanted was for his customers, employees, or neighbors to discover the darkness he carried inside. So instead, he raised his hands slowly, feigning surrender. "Take whatever you want," he said evenly, his voice betraying none of the anger boiling beneath the surface. "Just don't hurt anyone." The gang laughed, clearly amused by his apparent cowardice. "Oh, we'll take what we want, all right," the leader replied, shoving past Marcus and kicking open the glass door of the store. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the empty street, followed by the crash of display cases being overturned. Marcus watched in silence as they ransacked his beloved store, grabbing anything valuable they could get their hands on. Watches disappeared into pockets, jewelry boxes were emptied, and expensive handbags were tossed carelessly onto the floor. As much as Marcus wanted to intervene, he forced himself to stay still, memorizing every detail about the intruders. There was the leader with the jagged scar running down his left cheek, the wiry guy with a snake tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, and the youngest member, whose nervous glances suggested he might be new to the gang. Every movement, every word they spoke was etched into Marcus's mind. This wasn't just theft, it was personal, and Marcus knew exactly what he needed to do next. When the gang finally left, laughing and taunting him as they disappeared into the night. Marcus stood motionless amidst the wreckage of his store. Pieces of broken glass crunched underfoot as he surveyed the damage. His heart ached, not because of the stolen goods but because of the blatant disrespect. These thugs had dared to invade his sanctuary, the place where he had poured his soul. But more than anything, their racist remarks stung deeply. Marcus clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. For years he had tried to leave his violent past behind, convincing himself that he was done with bloodshed. But now, standing in the ruins of his hard work, Marcus realized something important. Some battles couldn't be avoided. Some enemies needed to be faced head-on. As he locked the shattered door behind him and walked to his car, a plan began forming in his mind. The gang may have thought they'd won tonight, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Marcus Kane was about to remind them and himself of the man he used to be. That night, Marcus Kane drove home in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hum of city life replaced by an unsettling stillness that matched the storm brewing inside him. His mind replayed the events of the evening over and over again, the sneers, the insults, the destruction of his store. Each memory fueled the fire of anger burning in his chest. But beneath the rage was something else: clarity. For years, Marcus had tried to bury his past, ashamed of the man he once was. Now, as he sat in the dim glow of his car's dashboard lights, he realized that perhaps his skills weren't meant to be forgotten. They were meant to protect. When Marcus arrived at his apartment, he didn't head straight to bed like he normally would. Instead, he walked to a locked room at the end of the hallway, a place he hadn't entered in years. The door creaked open reluctantly, revealing a space untouched by time. Inside, shelves lined the walls, each one holding relics from his former life. A collection of knives, a silenced pistol, stacks of old photographs, and files filled with names and faces he'd rather forget. In the center of the room stood a sturdy wooden table, its surface scratched and worn from countless hours of planning. This was where Marcus had prepared for missions in his assassin days, meticulously mapping out every detail to ensure success. Tonight, it would serve the same purpose. Marcus flicked on the overhead light and began sifting through the items. He pulled out a sleek laptop hidden beneath a stack of papers and powered it up. Though outdated, the device still held access to encrypted networks and contacts he'd maintained during his darker years. As the screen lit up, Marcus opened a secure messaging app and typed a single name: Ghost. Ghost was one of the few people Marcus trusted, a former handler who owed him more than one favor. Within minutes, a reply popped up. "Long time no see, Kane. What do you need?" Marcus explained the situation briefly, leaving out unnecessary details but making it clear that he needed information, and fast. By morning, Ghost delivered. A message appeared on Marcus's screen containing everything he needed to know about the gang. Their leader's real name, Victor Gray, their hideout location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, and a list of known associates. Armed with this intel, Marcus felt a familiar sense of focus wash over him. It was the same calm determination he used to feel before a mission, when every move mattered and failure wasn't an option. The next step was preparation. Marcus knew brute force wouldn't work here. These thugs were dangerous, and taking them all on directly could end badly. Strategy was key. He rummaged through the room, pulling out tools he hadn't touched in years. A pair of black gloves, lightweight yet durable. A tactical belt equipped with zip ties, smoke pellets, and a small vial of chloroform. And finally, a collapsible baton, a weapon designed for precision and control without causing permanent harm. Marcus didn't want to kill anyone. He just wanted to send a message. As dawn broke, Marcus stepped into his kitchen and brewed a cup of coffee, his mind racing with plans. He thought about Victor Gray, the smug grin on his face as he taunted Marcus outside the store. That look of superiority made Marcus's blood boil. How dare they think they could walk into his life and destroy everything he'd worked so hard to build? But more than anything, Marcus thought about the community he served. Ebony Lux wasn't just a business. It was a beacon of hope, proof that success was possible even in the face of adversity. If he let this gang get away with what they'd done, others might follow suit. No, Marcus couldn't allow that. Not now, not ever. By mid-morning, Marcus had finalized his plan. He would strike when the gang least expected it, under the cover of darkness, using stealth and surprise to dismantle them piece by piece. First, he would disable their communication systems, cutting off any chance of calling for backup. Then he would take them down individually, isolating each member until only Victor remained. Finally, he would confront the leader, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. It was risky, but Marcus had faced worse odds before. 2. Prepare physically. Marcus spent the rest of the day training. He cleared out his living room and set up makeshift obstacles, practicing movements he hadn't used in years. Leaps, rolls, and silent takedowns came back to him almost instinctively, muscle memory guiding his body as if no time had passed. Between exercises, he reviewed the layout of the warehouse, studying blueprints he'd acquired through Ghost. Every entrance, exit, and blind spot was committed to memory. By nightfall, Marcus was ready, not just physically, but mentally. He knew exactly what he had to do. Before leaving, Marcus stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. The man looking back at him was different from the polished businessman who greeted customers at Ebony Lux. This version of Marcus was colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Yet there was also a glimmer of pride in his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, as though he was reclaiming a part of himself he had buried long ago. "This isn't for revenge," he whispered to his reflection. "It's for justice." With that, Marcus grabbed his gear and headed out into the night. The streets were deserted, the city asleep as he made his way toward the warehouse. As he approached, he moved like a shadow, sticking to alleyways and avoiding streetlights. When he reached the building, he paused, surveying the area carefully. 2 guards stood near the entrance, chatting idly and smoking cigarettes. They were oblivious to the predator lurking in the darkness. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then, with calculated precision, he struck. The first guard went down silently, a swift blow to the neck rendering him unconscious. The second barely had time to react before Marcus disarmed him and secured his wrists with zip ties. Neither man saw his face. Satisfied, Marcus slipped inside the warehouse, disappearing into the labyrinth of corridors beyond. One by one, he neutralized the gang members, moving with the grace and efficiency of a seasoned killer. Each encounter brought him closer to his ultimate goal, Victor Gray. Unaware of the chaos unfolding around him, Victor lounged in a makeshift office deep within the warehouse, counting the stolen goods from Ebony Lux. He laughed arrogantly, convinced that his gang had won. Little did he know the man he had mocked was already closing in. Inside the dimly lit warehouse, Marcus Kane moved like a phantom. The air was thick with the smell of rusted metal and damp concrete, but he barely noticed. His focus was razor-sharp, every sense attuned to the task at hand. He navigated the narrow corridors silently, his boots making no sound against the cold floor. Shadows danced along the walls as flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow that seemed almost alive. It was the perfect cover for someone, like Marcus, someone who thrived in darkness. The first few gang members had been easy targets. They were scattered throughout the warehouse, either patrolling lazily or lounging around playing cards. None of them suspected they were being hunted. Marcus took advantage of their carelessness, striking quickly and efficiently. One by one, he incapacitated them without raising alarm. A well-placed pressure point here, a swift chokehold there. It was all second nature to him. Each thug crumpled to the ground, unconscious but unharmed. Marcus didn't want to kill. He wanted to teach them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As he ventured deeper into the labyrinthine structure, Marcus encountered more resistance. 2 men stood guard outside what appeared to be a storage room, their posture slightly more alert than the others. Marcus paused behind a stack of crates, observing their movements. These weren't amateurs. They carried themselves with a hint of discipline, likely veterans of street fights. Taking them both down simultaneously would require precision timing. Marcus reached into his tactical belt and retrieved a smoke pellet. With a quick flick of his wrist, he hurled it toward the guards. The small device erupted in a thick cloud of gray smoke, obscuring their vision instantly. Coughing and disoriented, the two men stumbled forward, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. That's when Marcus struck. Moving through the haze like a ghost, he closed the distance between them in seconds. A sharp elbow to the temple dropped the first guard, while a spinning kick sent the second sprawling to the floor. Before either could recover, Marcus secured their hands with zip ties and dragged them out of sight. With each step closer to Victor Gray, Marcus felt the weight of his past pressing down on him. Memories resurfaced, flashes of missions gone wrong, faces of those he'd eliminated, the hollow emptiness that followed every job. For years he had convinced himself that he was done with violence, that he could live a normal life. But now, surrounded by chaos once again, Marcus realized something profound. Violence wasn't inherently evil. It was a tool, just like any other. What mattered was how you wielded it, and tonight, he intended to use it to protect, not destroy. Finally, after clearing several sections of the warehouse, Marcus found himself standing outside a heavy steel door. Through the crack beneath it, light spilled onto the floor, accompanied by the faint murmur of voices. This had to be where Victor was hiding. Marcus pressed his ear to the cool metal, listening intently. Inside, he heard laughter, Victor's unmistakable sneer, and the clinking of glass bottles. The gang leader was celebrating, oblivious to the fact that his empire was crumbling around him. Marcus took a moment to steady his breathing. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the confrontation he knew was inevitable. Slowly, he pushed the door open just wide enough to slip inside. The scene before him confirmed his suspicions. Victor sat slouched in a chair, a bottle of whiskey dangling loosely from his fingers. Surrounding him were three other gang members equally drunk and distracted. Stolen goods from Ebony Lux were piled high on a table nearby. Watches, jewelry, designer bags, all gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel anger. These men had invaded his store, destroyed his property, and mocked everything he stood for. But then he reminded himself why he was here. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Quietly, he closed the door behind him and stepped into the room. The sound of the latch clicking shut drew everyone's attention. Heads snapped up, eyes widening in shock as they registered the figure standing in the doorway. Well, Victor slurred, rising unsteadily to his feet. Looks like we've got ourselves a visitor. His voice dripped with mockery, though there was a flicker of unease in his expression. Didn't think you'd have the guts to come back, Rich? Boy, Marcus said nothing. Instead, he removed his gloves slowly, letting the tension build. The gang members exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to make of this unexpected intruder. One of them reached for a gun tucked into his waistband, but Marcus was faster. In one fluid motion, he pulled out his collapsible baton and lunged forward, knocking the weapon from the man's hand before he could even aim. The loud clang of metal hitting the floor echoed through the room, startling everyone. What the hell is this? Victor barked, backing away clumsily. His bravado faltered as Marcus advanced, his movements deliberate and controlled. The remaining gang members scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for Marcus's skill. A swift kick sent one stumbling into a wall, while another collapsed after a precise strike to the jaw. Within moments, only Victor remained standing, his face pale with terror. You messed with the wrong guy, Marcus growled, his voice low and menacing. He grabbed Victor by the collar and slammed him against the steel door. You thought I was weak? That I wouldn't fight back? Victor stammered, his earlier arrogance evaporating completely. But please, don't hurt me. Marcus tightened his grip, leaning in close. This isn't about hurting you, he snarled. This is about showing you, and anyone else like you, that hate has consequences. With that, he delivered. a final blow to Victor's temple, rendering him unconscious. Breathing heavily, Marcus surveyed the room. The stolen goods lay untouched, a testament to his restraint. He hadn't come here for vengeance. He'd come to dismantle the gang and reclaim control. As he gathered evidence, photos, documents, names, he knew the authorities would handle the rest. But deep down, Marcus also understood something else. He couldn't run from his past forever. Sometimes the skills he despised were exactly what the world needed to fight back against injustice. And so, as Marcus slipped out of the warehouse and disappeared into the night, he felt a strange sense of peace. The battle wasn't over, but for now, justice had been served. By the time Marcus Kane emerged from the shadows of the warehouse, the first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The city was stirring awake, its streets slowly filling with the hum of early morning traffic and the distant chatter of people heading to work. But Marcus wasn't ready to return to his normal life just yet. His mission wasn't complete, not until he ensured that Victor Gray and his gang would face the full weight of justice. As he walked briskly through the deserted alleys, Marcus reviewed the evidence he had gathered. Photos of the stolen goods, recordings of conversations he'd overheard, and even a list of names scrawled on a crumpled piece of paper found in Victor's pocket. It was more than enough to implicate the gang in their crimes. However, Marcus knew better than to hand this information over directly to the police. Trusting law enforcement wasn't something he did lightly, especially when racism often seeped into the system itself. Instead, he decided to take matters into his own hands, just as he always had. Back at his apartment, Marcus powered up his old laptop once again. He accessed encrypted forums and anonymous messaging apps, reaching out to contacts who specialized in exposing corruption. These weren't ordinary informants. They were hackers, journalists, and activists who thrived on uncovering secrets and holding wrongdoers accountable. Within hours, Marcus uploaded the evidence to a secure server, ensuring it would reach the right people without leaving any trace of his involvement. By mid-morning, the story of the racist gang's exploits began circulating online, sparking outrage across social media platforms. News outlets picked up the scandal, broadcasting images of the stolen items and interviews with victims of the gang's previous attacks. Public pressure mounted, forcing local authorities to act swiftly. While the wheels of justice turned, Marcus returned to Ebony Lux. The shattered glass doors and overturned display cases greeted him like wounds waiting to heal. He sighed deeply, running a hand over the cracked marble counter where customers once marveled at his exquisite collection of luxury items. For years, this store had been his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the ghosts of his past. Now, it stood as a reminder of how fragile peace could be. Determined to rebuild, Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He called in contractors to repair the damage, replacing broken windows and restoring shelves to their former glory. Friends and loyal customers stopped by to offer support, some bringing flowers or offering to help clean up. One elderly woman, a regular shopper named Mrs. Thompson, clasped Marcus's hand tightly. "We're so sorry this happened to you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But we're here for you. You've done so much for this community. You deserve better." Her words struck a chord deep within Marcus. For years he had kept everyone at arm's length, fearing that his dark past might taint those around him. Yet here they were, standing beside him despite the chaos. It made him realize that Ebony Lux wasn't just a business. It was a cornerstone of the neighborhood, a symbol of resilience and hope. And now, more than ever, it needed to rise again. Over the next few days, news of the gang's arrest dominated headlines. Victor Gray and his accomplices were paraded before cameras, their smug expressions replaced by shame and fear. Authorities praised the anonymous tipster who had provided crucial evidence, unaware that the man responsible was quietly rebuilding his life mere blocks away. Marcus watched the coverage from his living room, feeling a mix of satisfaction and unease. Justice had been served, but at what cost? He couldn't deny the thrill he'd felt during the confrontation, the rush of adrenaline, the clarity of purpose. Part of him worried that embracing violence, even for noble reasons, might awaken darker instincts he had worked so hard to suppress. To distract himself, Marcus threw himself into reviving Ebony Lux. He redesigned parts of the store, incorporating new displays and expanding his inventory to include pieces inspired by African artistry. Each item told a story, a celebration of culture, heritage, and strength. Customers noticed the change immediately. "This place feels alive again," one woman remarked as she browsed a selection of handmade jewelry. Marcus smiled faintly, knowing she was right. The store wasn't just recovering, it was evolving, much like its owner. Despite his efforts to move forward, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had consequences beyond what he could see. Late at night, when the city fell silent and the weight of his choices pressed down on him, he found himself staring at the locked door of the hidden room. The tools of his former life lay untouched inside, relics of a chapter he thought he'd closed forever. But now they seemed closer than ever, whispering reminders of the man he used to be. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment nursing a cup of coffee, there was a knock at the door. Startled, he rose cautiously, peering through the peephole. On the other side stood a young man no older than 20, dressed in worn jeans and a hoodie. His face was familiar, though Marcus couldn't quite place him. Cautiously, he opened the door. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his tone guarded. The young man hesitated, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I think you saved my brother," he stammered. "His name's Jamal. He was part of that gang, the one that got arrested last week." Marcus frowned, recalling the wiry member with the snake tattoo. That must have been Jamal. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "I don't know why you did what you did," the boy continued, his voice trembling. "But thank you. My mom, she's been trying to get him out of trouble for years. She didn't think anyone cared enough to stop him before. He ruined his life completely." For a moment, Marcus was speechless. He hadn't considered the ripple effects of his actions, the families impacted, the lives redirected. All he had wanted was to protect his own world, yet somehow, he had touched someone else's too. It was both humbling and unsettling. "Tell your mom to keep fighting for him," Marcus finally said, his voice softening. "People can change if they're given a chance." The young man nodded gratefully and turned to leave. As Marcus watched him disappear down the hallway, he felt a strange sense of connection, a reminder that even in darkness, light could find its way through. Perhaps this was the lesson he needed to learn. That power, whether wielded violently or compassionately, always carried responsibility. And for Marcus Kane, the journey toward understanding that truth was far from over. As the weeks passed, Marcus Kane settled into a fragile sense of normalcy. The repairs to Ebony Lux were nearly complete, and the store began to hum with activity once again. Customers returned, drawn not only by the allure of luxury but also by the resilience of its owner. Word had spread about the racist gang's downfall and how Marcus had stood his ground, even if no one knew the full extent of what he'd done. To the community, he was a symbol of strength, a man who refused to be intimidated. Yet beneath the surface, Marcus wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt pride in having protected his business and sent a message to those who sought to harm others out of hate. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the gnawing guilt that lingered in the back of his mind. He had promised himself years ago that he would never let violence define him again. Yet here he was, relying on skills he thought he'd left behind. Was this truly justice, or was it simply vengeance cloaked in righteousness? These questions haunted him, keeping him awake at night. One evening, as Marcus locked up the store, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. It was sleek and black, its tinted windows reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, just another vehicle in a busy neighborhood, but something about it made Marcus uneasy. His instincts screamed at him to stay alert. Slowly, he glanced around, scanning the shadows for movement. Nothing appeared out of place, but the feeling persisted. Before he could investigate further, the driver's side window rolled down slightly, revealing the silhouette of a man. "Marcus Kane," A smooth, measured voice called out. "We need to talk." Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't recognize the voice, but there was an authority to it that demanded attention. Against his better judgment, he crossed the street, stopping a few feet away from the car. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone sharp and wary. The man leaned forward slightly, allowing the dim light to illuminate his face. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with sharp features and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see straight through Marcus. "My name is Daniel Cross," the man replied calmly. "I represent interests that have been monitoring your activities lately." Marcus's stomach tightened. He knew exactly what that meant. Someone had been watching him, not just during the raid on the warehouse, but possibly long before that. "If you're here to threaten me, save your breath," Marcus said coldly, turning to walk away. "I'm not here to threaten you," Daniel interjected quickly, his voice firm but calm. "In fact, quite the opposite. You've caught our attention, Mr. Kane. Your actions against Victor Gray and his gang were impressive, precise, calculated. We respect that." Marcus stopped mid-step, his mind racing. Who were these people? And why did they care about what he'd done? He turned back slowly, narrowing his eyes. "What do you want?" Daniel smiled faintly, as though amused by Marcus's skepticism. "Let's just say we operate in circles where men like you are valued. Men who understand the balance between power and discretion. Men who can get things done without drawing unnecessary attention." It was clear now. These weren't ordinary observers. They were part of some larger organization, likely involved in shadowy dealings far beyond anything Marcus wanted to be associated with. Yet, despite his desire to distance himself, curiosity gnawed at him. "And if I'm not interested?" he asked cautiously. "That's entirely your choice," Daniel replied, his tone neutral. "But consider this. The world is full of people who prey on the vulnerable, people like Victor Gray, and worse. If you choose to walk away, we won't stop you. But think about how many others might suffer because no one stepped in to stop them." The word struck a nerve. Marcus had always believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was why he'd opened Ebony Lux in the first place. Still, he wasn't naive enough to believe that aligning himself with such an enigmatic group wouldn't come with risks. "Why should I trust you?" he countered. "You shouldn't," Daniel admitted frankly. "Trust is earned, not given. All I'm offering is an opportunity, a chance to use your abilities for something greater than yourself. Whether you take it or not is up to you." With that, he gestured toward the passenger seat. "Take a ride with me. Hear me out. No strings attached." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Every fiber of his being told him to walk away, to shut the door on this chapter of his life forever. But deep down, he couldn't deny the pull of purpose, the idea that he might still have a role to play in shaping a better world. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he sighed and climbed into the car. As they drove through the city, Daniel spoke in measured tones, outlining the nature of their organization. They weren't criminals, he explained, but rather a network of individuals dedicated to dismantling corruption and exposing injustice wherever it lurked. Their methods were unconventional, often operating in the gray areas between legality and morality. While Marcus listened intently, he couldn't help but notice parallels between their philosophy and his own beliefs. Eventually, the car came to a stop atop a hill overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, a tapestry of lights, stretching endlessly into the horizon. For a while, neither man spoke. Then Daniel broke the silence. "You've already proven you're capable of extraordinary things, Marcus. What happens next is entirely up to you. But remember this, power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. How you choose to wield yours will define the legacy you leave behind." With that, Daniel handed Marcus a small card bearing a single phone number. "Think it over," he said simply, then exited the car and disappeared into the night. Back at home, Marcus stared at the card for hours, his mind swirling with possibilities. Could he really walk away from everything he'd built? Or was this an opportunity to channel his darker instincts into something meaningful. Whatever decision he made, one thing was certain: Marcus Kane's journey was far from over. The next morning, Marcus Kane woke up with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The small card Daniel Cross had given him lay on the kitchen counter, its stark simplicity mocking him. A single phone number. That was all it took to step back into a life he had sworn to leave behind. Yet as much as Marcus wanted to ignore it, he couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would shape not only his future, but also the lives of countless others. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city come alive below. The streets were already bustling with people rushing to work, children heading to school, and vendors setting up their stalls. It was a reminder of how fragile yet resilient communities could be, and how easily they could crumble under the wrong hands. Marcus thought about Daniel's words. Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. They echoed in his mind like a mantra, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. Was he truly done with violence, or had he simply convinced himself of that lie? Over the years, he had tried to bury the darker parts of his past, believing that running Ebony Lux and contributing to his community were enough to redeem him. But now, faced with the prospect of using his skills for something greater, he wondered if redemption wasn't about erasing who you were, but embracing it and choosing to act differently. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself unable to focus. At the store, customers complimented him on the renovations, marveling at how vibrant Ebony Lux felt once again. Employees buzzed around, restocking shelves and arranging displays with renewed energy. To everyone else, Marcus appeared calm and composed, the same dependable man they had always known. Inside, however, he was anything but. His thoughts kept circling back to the card, each mental debate pulling him in opposite directions. Should he call? Should he walk away? Could he live with the consequences either way? That evening, after closing the store, Marcus returned to his apartment and stared at the card again. This time he picked it up and held it between his fingers, weighing its significance. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a challenge, a test of whether he was willing to face the shadows within himself. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached for his phone and dialed the number. The voice on the other end was calm and unhurried. "Mr. Kane," Daniel said, as though he'd been expecting the call. "I assume you've made your decision." "I haven't decided anything, yet," Marcus replied firmly, though his tone betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "But I'm willing to hear more." "Good," Daniel responded, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Meet me tomorrow night at 9 p.m. You'll receive the location shortly." Before Marcus could ask any questions, the line went dead. For a moment he stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. Then, exhaling deeply, he placed it down and sank onto the couch. Whatever path lay ahead, there was no turning back now. The following night, Marcus arrived at the designated location, a secluded rooftop overlooking the city's industrial district. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of oil and machinery. Daniel was already there, leaning casually against the railing as though he owned the place. Beside him stood another figure cloaked in shadow. As Marcus approached, the second person stepped forward, revealing themselves to be a woman in her early 40s with sharp features and an air of quiet authority. "This is Elena Vega," Daniel introduced, gesturing toward her. "She leads one of our field operations teams. If you choose to join us, she'll be your handler." Elena extended a hand, which Marcus shook cautiously. Her grip was firm, her eyes steady as they studied him. "Welcome to the edge of the gray zone," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "It's not an easy path, but it's necessary." Over the next hour, Daniel and Elena explained the scope of their organization in greater detail. They weren't vigilantes or criminals. They were strategists working behind the scenes to dismantle networks of corruption, exploitation, and hate. Their targets ranged from human traffickers to corporate empires built on exploitation. Success depended on precision, discretion, and unwavering commitment to the cause. Failure meant risking innocent lives and sometimes their own. You won't be asked to do anything you're not ready for, Elena assured him. But know this. Once you step into this world, there's no looking back. Your actions will have consequences, both good and bad. Are you prepared for that? Marcus hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the city lights twinkling in the distance. He thought about Victor Gray, the gang, and the countless victims whose lives had been shattered by hatred and greed. He thought about Mrs. Thompson, Jamal's brother, and the young families who relied on his store as a beacon of hope. Most of all, he thought about himself, the man he used to be and the man he wanted to become. Yes, he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I'm ready. A small smile tugged at Elena's lips. Then welcome aboard, Mr. Kane. We'll start training you immediately. In the weeks that followed, Marcus underwent rigorous preparation, honing his skills while learning new ones. He trained alongside Elena and her team, mastering everything from advanced surveillance techniques to non-lethal combat methods. Though the work was demanding, it gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Each mission brought challenges but also victories, victims rescued, criminals brought to justice, and communities given a chance to heal. Yet even as Marcus embraced his new role, he remained grounded in his identity as the owner of Ebony Lux. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Customers continued to flock to his store, unaware of the battles being fought in the shadows. For Marcus, this duality became a kind of balance, a way to honor both sides of himself without letting either consume him. One evening, as he locked up the store, Marcus paused to admire the gleaming sign above the door. Ebony Lux. It represented more than luxury. It symbolized resilience, hope, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Smiling faintly, Marcus turned and walked into the night, ready to face whatever came next. For Marcus Kane, the fight was far from over, but neither was his journey toward redemption.